What makes a great leader? We believe great leaders are those that care about their people and have the right skills to empower and inspire. Welcome to the SoftSkillable Leader, a podcast where we help you step into your authority, lead with confidence, and connect with those around you, all by leaning into your strengths. We provide practical tips to grow your leadership skills, and we'll also talk to seasoned leaders who exemplify impactful leadership and lead by example. I am your host, Julia Brutesco, a John Maxwell certified coach and engineer, along with my co-host Dan Doyle, a certified behavioral consultant. Whether you're leading for the first time or looking to level up your influence, this podcast gives you practical tools to grow your mindset, communication, and leadership presence. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to our SoftSkillable podcast. We're very excited to be here, and we are going to be exploring all things leadership and what it takes to be a great leader. And we're very excited to introduce our guest today, Mike Owens, who is the fire chief of the Port Alberni Fire Department. And we're celebrating him today in terms of his accomplishments in leadership. He has a depth of experience and knowledge in leadership as it, of course, relates to the fire service. However, the lessons that he has learned over the years, there's just so much richness there that we can learn from. And so we're really excited to explore that with him today. So welcome, Mike. We're excited to have you here, and it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of an overview of your leadership experience and how you've come to be in your current role.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mike Owens. My present position, as was stated, was fire chief of the City of Port Alberni. And in addition to that, I do a bit of consulting on the side because I don't think my days are full enough, I suppose. I've been the fire chief here since 2019. And prior to that, I had two roles as the fire and mine rescue chief for two different industrial underground mine operations. So working for a publicly traded company. So kind of getting that mix between the demands of, private industry and now the demands of public sector life. So it's a real pleasure to be here.
Wow, that's quite the experience. I can imagine how different those different industries might be. But I'm curious to know about sort of your teams, right, and how they may have been different in more of that private sector arena versus the more of the public service sector. And can you tell us a little bit more about some of the maybe challenges or opportunities you had as a leader in being able to, say, motivate your team, or is there something in your experience that you found notable that would help other leaders really learn from your experience?
Yeah, I think the objectives of the overall organization are obviously fundamentally different. So the objective of private industry is profit based, and so you're trying to push out as much product as is possible in order to generate the most profit that's possible. And in that arena, emergency response is really seen as two things. One is it's an insurance policy, and the other is that it's a dead cost, right? Nobody makes money off of the big red truck. And so that posed its own unique challenges. I think a lot of that was trying to motivate management above me in how to release their personnel from those production-based jobs and have them come in and participate in training, or even in some cases participate in responses that were happening both at the mine sites themselves as well as in service to the province. Let's say on a large-scale wildfire event that was happening outside of town. And then transitioning into the public sector, obviously, the public sector operates at a loss, which is why you pay property taxes every year is to benefit from the services that are provided by a municipality, and so the motivations are different. Still, that need for fiscal responsibility, but it's more about defining levels of service and then meeting those levels of service and motivating your people to deliver on that ask. And so there is definitely a change between the two. They both pose their own unique challenges, but they're both stimulating environments to be in, for sure.
Yeah, that's incredible. I can only imagine, having come from industry as well and working in the environmental department. It's a very similar scenario in that environmental mitigation costs money, right? It's an important part of the operation, but it is not a revenue generating part of the operation. So I can completely appreciate the challenge that you would have in ensuring that, those above you really appreciate and understand that the work that you do and the work that your team does in that, right? Because it's asset protection. And until something goes wrong, it's not really appreciated. So I can appreciate your challenge in that.
Yeah, and I would say that in both environments, which wouldn't be dissimilar to people that are working outside of, the emergency response industry, you're trying to appease somebody that you report to and influence them appropriately, and at the same time, influencing those who report to you to kind of rise to the occasion. And so those are certainly different dynamics, different meetings that you're taking. But yeah, you're definitely managing up and managing down.
Yeah, and both definitely have a unique set of challenges. I can only imagine from a motivation standpoint. Certainly, goals are different for those above and say on your team. So I'm curious to dive into that a little bit more because, as you know, at our SoftSkillable program, we are helping leaders build those soft skills to really be able to be effective in their role. And that includes being able to manage and influence and motivate their team, but then also to have that communication and influence for those above them, right? And so these skills are sometimes nuanced and are sometimes hard to measure. And so I'm so curious to hear from you in terms of some of the sort of the specific challenges you may have had, perhaps with individuals, and what were some of your realizations in terms of, why you were having some of those difficulties, whether it was a conflict or just a sort of a disconnect in, being on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a few thoughts that rattle through my head when I think about that. One is that I think we often tend to hire folks that are similar to us. And so sometimes you can get into a situation where you end up with a cohesive team, but not enough of that healthy conflict that can happen in order to move organizations ahead. And obviously, at some point you start new into an organization or you're building an organization from the floor up, and but more times than not, you're coming new into the organization and you inherit the folks that are there. And sometimes you can run into situations where it's just really frustrating that you're employing your same motivational techniques that you've done and been successful with previous teams. Say in that private industry role, I got to build that team from scratch, and so I kind of knew how everybody ticked. And then coming into this organization that I'm in now, there's just different personality types, and so sometimes you're tasking folks with work and then finding yourself to be disappointed in the results. Um, and that's kind of where, the disc profile shines in many ways, is you can take yourself through that disc profile, and it does two things. I think one is it really identifies who you are and what your motivations are, and you can kind of see yourself in the reports that are generated. But equally, if not more important, I think it brings you to these aha moments of like, oh, the reason why I'm not getting the results I had hoped for was because this person has just different traits than I do, which is okay. It makes for a stronger team, but the things that they need to motivate them are just different. And if you're failing to employ those techniques, then it's no surprise that you end up frustrated at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And that's great that you found a tool. Certainly DISC is one of those. And I know there are other self-awareness assessments that can really highlight those things. It sounds like you found it valuable in having that sort of insight, in really understanding, what motivates you. It doesn't motivate, the next person, or the person down the road type of thing. So it sounds like you've definitely been able to leverage some of that information. Is there an example or somewhere where you can get a little bit deeper in that? Because I'm curious as to what is your style? Because I'm a challenger. I'm a DC, and so I'm very, very task oriented. And Dan, the co-founder of Stratesco Group and SoftSkillable, is an SIC, so steadiness, influencer, and conscientiousness. And so we couldn't be more opposite in respect to how we like to do things. I'm very task oriented. Dan is very much about being the cohesiveness and the ideas, and I just want to get her done. Right. And so for us, our dynamic is very much, we need to be very respectful and aware when we're putting on, our styles a little bit too strong, because our business, of course, depends on us being able to work together. So I'm curious in terms of, your realizations once you kind of explored that tool, what sort of, did it make an impact in the way you were approaching your team? And, if there are any insights that you can share on that?
Yeah. So I kind of sit in the I realm, and I actually looked back because I was curious if that's changed over time, and you kind of think about yourself over a long body of time, and you can see that you grow over that time, right? And so I had looked back to a disc profile that I'd done back in 2008, I believe it was, and I was still an I back then. So interesting that although you may mature and you may take in more wisdom and knowledge and employ that, that your style stays mostly the same, or at least it did for me. Yeah, and this situation, one situation that comes to mind is that of somebody that was working for me, and yeah, we were just running into issues where I would task them, and my style is that once you give your body of work over to somebody and you say go to it, you just expect that it's going to be done, and then sometimes a period of time would go by, and the realization would be made that that task wasn't done. And so circling back around to that, and anchoring back off the disc profile, I realized that person probably lives more in like a D sort of a category, and so what they needed was constant feedback, and they needed me to, and what we did is we established weekly meetings where we would just check in and make sure that we aligned our priorities, set new objectives. That person could communicate with me if they were encountering any challenges. I could keep them on task. And another part of that individual's personality was that they needed affirmation. They needed positive affirmation that they were doing great work. And that's something that I find for me. I don't need somebody giving me an attaboy all the time, but other people do. And so I was able to pivot the way that I interacted with that employee, and the results were, transformational, where all of a sudden, we started to become more aligned, and the work was getting done. So yeah, that's an example for me of employing the tool.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds like the productivity of your team member just increased as a result of that adjustment in your leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it made it, a more pleasant place to work for that individual as well, right? I mean, I think we all have to get up in the morning and go to work, and you want, at a minimum, for the human interactions to be, a highlight of that day, a positive part of that day. And where you have misalignment in profile types without acknowledgement of that misalignment, you can run into situations where you're encountering unproductive friction within your group.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious too if you noticed a positive impact on other team members now that this individual's productivity kind of increased, because I would imagine people, everybody is paying attention, right? And so your team would see if somebody is not pulling their weight, so to speak, and leadership is unwilling to address that, people notice that, and it generally tends to reduce the motivation of the group. And so I'm curious if you notice that sort of impact, because sometimes it's very subtle and it's very slight, but did you notice if the group productivity as a whole increased, as a result, did their motivations increase as a result of, being able to give this particular individual what they needed to be motivated and to be a more active participant in sort of the group team?
Yeah, well, I think, when these things are happening in real time, you almost feel like it's that the person is just unwilling to put the work in. And in reality, it's just that their motivations are different, and what they need from the people around them are different. And so once that adjustment was made, certainly, the productivity went up, and some of those asks that this person and any person have don't only just affect me. Obviously, they affect the group as a whole. And so once they were able to, do their fair share, because they were given, we set the table for them instead of setting the table for us. And so once we set the table for them, and they were able to contribute meaningfully, yeah, certainly it rose the entire organization up, especially as a small organization like ours.
I can imagine you can't really hide from those sorts of those things where, if something's not going wrong or if something is going wrong, everybody notices, right?
Yes.
That's phenomenal. And, I think we applaud you, Mike, because, you've just essentially described our philosophy in leadership, right? This is who we are as individuals and who we strive to continue to grow into, and to see that applied in the real world is something that's very motivating for us, because we would love to see every leader think the way that you do about their team and about their organization, because you're absolutely right. We all get up, every day wanting to make an impact in this world. And we do that through our skills, the things that we've invested in ourselves in. So whether it's a university degree or a trade or a physical skill, we want to be purposeful in our life, and having an organization in which people can come to and apply those skills, it fosters that fulfillment and that feeling like there is purpose. And so, we applaud you 100%. We applaud you. And so thank you for being so, amazing at what you do. I'm sure it was not always easy, right, to make some of these decisions and to implement some of these strategies that you have done, and that has caused, but has brought you the successes that you are realizing. But it's tremendous, and clearly everybody is better for that.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. Yeah, and I think that this is one step along the journey. I think certainly a second step would be to roll out these profiles to the entire work group. And in doing that, I'm sure that it just allows, as I said kind of earlier on, it allows everybody to have those aha moments of the person that they're having that unproductive friction with. And so certainly I think that there's a benefit to that. Obviously, everyone is constrained by budget, unless you're in an organization that you should send me the link to so that I can come and join it. So if you have to start somewhere, then start with yourself. But, I think that the evolution of this and other products like it is that you roll it out to the masses and allow them to all discover a little bit more about themselves. And as I said, maybe more importantly, about the people that they interact with on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely. Having your own report, it brings that to light, that this is the way I think. Oh yes, because I don't know about you, but when I read my report, I'm like, oh my, this is describing me to a T. It's eerie how accurate, or how close it's gotten. It's not perfect, but certainly it has highlighted enough for me to believe that it has my number. It knows, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you kind of see where you land, you start to recognize the traits of those that you tend to have conflict with, right? And so, and I think this is, not only does it allow you, does it open up your mind to see others in a different light, but I think it also can help change the approach to being from a narrative of like, this person is doing on purpose and they're not, why aren't they motivated? What's wrong with them? To curiosity, where it's, wait a second, they don't operate the same way I do. How can I approach them differently to really understand what it is they need? Right. And when we can do that, we create a more caring and more of a warm interaction with people, right? Because people want to be cared, they want to feel like they're cared for. I think it doesn't matter where you are in the DISC profile. I think that is a genuine human need. And so if we're able to adjust our approach, always keeping our vision and our goals in mind for the team or for the organization, but to be able to interact in a way that is just more conducive to human existence, right? And I know that might sound out there, but when we think about the elements of good communication and motivation and influence, it really comes down to being able to speak to the other person in the way that they need it. They need to be spoken to, right? And giving them what
absolutely.
they need.
Yeah, and I think, communication really is our relationships, right? I mean, without that clear communication that connects with the other person, you don't have a relationship. And so when I look at these tools, I look at them as information. They're not the be all end all. They're not going to solve if you have a toxic work environment right now and you roll out a DISC profile, you're still going to have a toxic work environment the next day. But it's valuable information to take in. I think it's valuable in terms of building out your teams. Like if you're going to fan out these DISC profiles, or other tools to all of your employees, and you realize that everybody's stuck in the same quadrant, then it's something to consider. It doesn't mean that you need to fire three-quarters of your crew and make sure that you hire equally throughout each quadrant, but it means that you have some new information, that you may have your blinders on in certain areas, and that the reason that the meetings are so agreeable is you just have a bunch of the same people that are sitting in the room, but you might be missing an opportunity for greater productivity or greater growth within your organization. So it's more data points. Obviously, the more information and data that you can take in, the better your decisions will be.
Yeah, agreed. And we've seen the DISC, like a similar assessment such as the DISC as part of the hiring process for exactly the reason that you described, right? To be able to have that diversity of thinking and diversity of communication just builds a better team. Yes, you have challenges in ensuring that everybody works cohesively, but the output is always better because of the different ways of looking, say, at a problem or looking at developing a product. That innovation aspect of those sorts of processes benefit from having those different thinkers and people who can see the same thing differently.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Very cool. Very cool.
Mike, I want to ask you a question, and feel free to challenge the assumptions that I'm going to make. Okay. When I think about fire service, I think of it as somewhat a paramilitary structure. And the firefighters that I know, some of whom are family members, have always wanted to be firefighters. That was their career ambition. So I'm wondering about the concept of retention issues. If you have a group of people working in the fire service that have always wanted to be there, and you have a choice in what I said was could be a paramilitary structure where you can let your authority reign versus a more open management and leadership environment where you're expressing the care and for each individuals. Do you think that there would be any difference if you opted to go with the authoritarian model, knowing that you're going to have a high tolerance among your employees to put up with a lot because they want to be there, versus the approach that you take, as you describe it, of trying to meet the needs of each individual as you perceive them, and understanding their different motivators and et cetera. So do you think there would be a difference in the environment and the culture that you work with if you chose one model over the other?
Yeah. And of course there is certainly for the individuals that you're hiring. I would say that, as I just reflect back on my own career, 25 years, I think that we used to have a lot more authoritarian type A sort of personalities that were running maybe not only fire departments, but, I remember working in a lumber mill and if I wasn't being yelled at, I was worried that the boss might not be doing okay that day. So that was just kind of the nature of, if you want to call it leadership, of management anyway, of the day. And I think that's shifted. I think it's shifted for the better. I think that the work has shifted too, right? Like if I come from a very unoriginal family where, my brother's a career firefighter. My father was a career firefighter and fire chief. His identical twin was a fire chief. My grandfather was a fire chief. My poor kids, hey. But
yeah.
but anyhow, and when I think about the work that those previous generations did, it was more fire centered. And so it was more about, taking clear, concise direction, getting through the door, searching for patients, putting wet stuff on the red stuff, high risk, poor quality personal protective equipment, ambiguous communications on the fire scenes, all of these sort of things. And now, thank goodness, we've evolved. But some of that evolution has come deliberately, and some of it is just the nature of the work is now, here in this community, we do about 67% of our call volume is medical. And so having the gruff type A barking orders personality, when you have an individual that's, having the worst day of their lives and they're surrounded by family members that are having their worst day of their lives, just isn't appropriate. And so I think that starts from the top, and I think, leading by example, and I was just in a crew meeting earlier this week, and we were talking about just leading with kindness towards one another, and leading with kindness towards the population that we serve. That doesn't mean that there's not rules, and that when the going gets tough and we are at that structure fire, it does revert back to a very paramilitary sort of an organization. But regardless, I think, and it's not my line, it's Larry Watkinson, who was deputy fire chief in Kelowna, said, be easy on the people and tough on the issues. And I think when the fire's out and we're back at the station, if something went wrong, or if we're just in labor management meetings, things of the like, then, there's going to be issues that have to be resolved. This is the nature of all organizations, including union organizations. But you can do so respectfully, and you can do so in a manner where you can adamantly oppose the issue that's being brought forward, while still being kind to the person who's delivering that message.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive perspective on a question like that.
Yeah. I love the dynamic of the flow of the style of leadership that is employed in that particular scenario that you mentioned, right? Where it's not a one size fits all, certainly, but then same with the situation. It requires a dynamic leader to be able to apply those different styles depending on what the situation is. But I think the philosophy remains solid as the same of it's about the people. The people are first. Let's be kind. Let's ensure that we take care of each other so that we can tackle those issues when the going gets tough. And, when things get hard, I think when there's that trust and that connection, that's when people are at their best and can succeed in those tough situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does build a better team, and you're going to be threatened by, I'm sure most people are familiar with kind of a SWOT exercise, where you're looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And I think when you're able to navigate your way through difficult situations where you enter on opposite sides of the table and you leave on opposite sides of the table on that issue, but you're able to do so in a manner that's respectful, and that you're able to communicate the why we can't be aligned here. I think it builds that resilience. And when you have those external threats that are coming into your organization, you're just better able to deal with them, because you're not worried that there's also a threat within the building.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. It's one less barrier, right, to overcome. You're tackling the actual barrier together. That makes life easier, but also much more fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which is an important part of work.
And we spend a lot of our lives at work, a lot of our time there. If it isn't fun, I think, there's definitely a recommendation to reconsider the work that one does. If it isn't fun and if it isn't fulfilling and it doesn't allow you to bring your best and to be purposeful with the skills that you've invested so much time and energy in, to be able to bring those forward. I think it's so crucial in this life. Just being mindful of the things that we do.
Yeah. Buy a great bed and find a workplace that you can laugh every day.
Love it. I love it. It's the best advice I think I've ever heard. But thank you so much, Mike. This has been an incredible journey in your experience, and in your career journey, but also to learn about your philosophies and how you apply leadership and, the impact that you've had on your team and your organization, really driving home the point of connection and relationships, because that is, at the end of the day, the heart of success. And so thank you so much for your time. Do you have any last remarks before we close up? In all honesty, this has been an absolute joy.
No, I don't think anything in particular. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you got value from today's episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a fellow leader or left a quick review to help others find the show. If you want more tools to grow your leadership presence, head over to SoftSkillable.com for free resources and updates. Until next time, keep leading with intention and keep growing forward. We'll see you next time.